Hello, it's Larry Clark with Excelsior Music Publishing, and we're doing another Meet the Composer. And today we have composer Stephen Rosenhaus, and we have orchestra director Chris Harrison. So thanks for all of you for being here. And Chris, fire away with your questions.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Sure.
All right. So let's start with this. So Stephen, where are you from? Are you from New York?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Born and raised.
Yeah. And so you're teaching at NYU now.
Mm-hmm.
It's wonderful.
I've been an adjunct there for many years at this point.
Adjuncting.
Yeah.
This is a little bit of an aside, but do you find it difficult to make the jump, even though you have a doctorate and all this experience, but getting from adjunct into full-time tenured position?
I think the answer to that is I've been teaching as an adjunct at NYU for many years.
I mean, it's a lot of why I didn't decide to get my doctorate. Because I know that it's just higher education is in such a tough place right now. You know, it's outpriced the middle class so much, and the majority of professors are adjunct like yourself. So you have to have multiple streams of income.
A little known secret, or I don't know if it's such a secret, but not many people realize that most schools, most colleges, universities that are accredited, that accreditation, whatever the word is based on the number of full-time faculty. They need a minimum number for that. And once they have that, they can fill in with adjuncts. So it got to the point at NYU many years ago when the adjuncts had to organize. Mm. And when we started, because of pay issues and a lot of other issues, and in the process of doing that, NYU fired about half of the adjuncts. Now, in my department, Department of Music and Performing Arts, I'm not saying anything out of turn here. These are facts that are all out in the open. They fired something like 200 adjuncts just from my department. I don't know how I escaped that. But
yeah. Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing I think we all have to be aware of, because we work in music education and we're teaching these kids to be like trained classical musicians. And it used to be a concept where you'd go to the ivory tower and work in the university, but it's like, it's way more complex than that these days to have a career in music.
I've always have been, there are many ways to put it. Neither fish nor fowl is one way. Another way is an iconoclast, because I've always been on both sides of things. I've always been somewhat academic and a lot not academic. Mm-hmm. I mean, before I went back for my doctorate, I worked in music publishing and as a freelance composer and arranger and conductor for about 6 years. So, you know, and even going back to NYU, you know, I'm still mostly a freelance musician. Mm.
So, all right. So that kind of brings up just like your background. So you're born in New York. Where in New York are you from?
Brooklyn.
From Brooklyn. Okay.
I'm a Brooklyn guy.
From Brooklyn, man. Mott Street.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
I grew up in East Flatbush.
Okay.
At first, and then we moved to Canarsie, which then was considered a step up.
Yeah.
And then after I got married, starting with that, I've been living in Queens. So more than half my life now is in Queens, Forest Hills.
Yeah. So you're in the city, and when you're growing up, what were you studying as far as music? What was your instrument?
Oh, I tried a lot of different things as a kid.
Yeah.
And either didn't have the patience or the interest. I'm being absolutely frank here, to go along with any of them. And not just instruments, some other things too. In quick succession, and I don't remember the order, we can say accordion, piano. Yeah, back then it was accordion, you know, Lady of Spain and all that stuff. So there's that, accordion, piano, That was the first attempt. Second attempt went a lot better because I was older.
Yeah.
Tap dancing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no, terrible. That was terrible.
So you've been plugged into the arts like your whole life, pretty much.
My whole life. My
Yeah.
parents used to tell me when I was a young adult that I was singing at the age of 2.
Wow, that's very cute.
So
then how did you make the transition from, you're doing like your hand and exercises on piano, and then you're like, I want to like not just play Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, I want to make some music of my own.
Well, the piano came even later. Actually, I really started getting into piano in high school. A lot of things coalesced in high school, but my first instrument was the guitar. I consider musically speaking, I consider myself a vocalist first, the guitarist second, and then after that, all the other instruments that I play: mandolin, ukulele, electric bass, penny whistle,
yeah,
and keyboard.
Anything you get your hands on, probably.
If it has strings or frets, I'll figure it out.
Sure, yeah.
And which is dangerous because somebody recently gave me a 5-string banjo.
Oh,
watch out, world!
That right hand technique on banjo is not a joke.
No, well, it's not just the right hand. It's the fact that you have. If you look at one end, you see 4 strings. If you look at the other end, you have 5 strings.
I don't know who figured that. That tuning system is African, right? The banjo. So
originally, yeah.
Yeah, maybe it comes from there. Okay,
but the ukulele is the same thing.
With the high string on top.
Yeah, re-entrant tuning.
As a bass player, I'm like, just don't do that. So you started writing at some point. When did you start trying to write some music?
Pretty much as soon as I got a guitar.
Yeah.
I started learning songs by now. Keep in mind how old I am. So I grew up on the Beatles and Simon and Garfunkel and James Taylor, etc. So I wanted to emulate them. So I started writing my own songs. Make a long story short, by the time I got into high school, I wanted to do more than that.
Mm-hmm.
So I picked up the violin at that point.
Oh, in high school?
In high school.
It's late.
Yeah, very late. And I never got very good.
Hard.
No,
so hard.
Well, what it is that even by that point, I was hearing the way it should sound in my head.
Yeah.
And my fingers were never cooperating.
I know. Yeah, there's a huge gap between that. A beginner violinist and a professional violinist, it's so hard to convince them. Like a ballerina or something. It's like, especially to take your whole life, Especially as a guitarist, because, you don't realize how much you rely on those frets. I know. Yeah, you get to cheat. Because I started playing upright bass, and then once I got an electric bass, I was like, I'll just play this all the time. This is great. But yeah, I had to get back into my violin studies pretty seriously in school. And it's just a different experience. It's different than almost anything we have in life.
Yeah.
You have to sit down for hours and very diligently work on it without looking at your cell phone and no computer. Well, okay, so this kind of brings up, this is a good transition. Here's a quick aside. You were in the military band, right?
No.
You did Navy band?
I've written for them. No.
You're doing some work. Okay.
Yeah.
I see. Because I was wondering if maybe you would know Brian Kidd. Have you ever heard this name?
Brian
Kidd. He's the head arranger for the Navy Jazz Band. And he was my first jazz teacher. So I figured there was a military.
I know a bunch of military people, mostly Navy, but
they're great bands.
Oh my God, yeah. My first experience writing for band was for the Naval Academy Band.
Oh goodness, that's a lot of pressure because you have to have the style perfect.
Oh, it's not a question of style. They didn't want the typical style. They wanted me to write something as me.
Good.
Which was the best thing they ever could have told me.
Yeah.
No, the scary part for me was conducting the premiere. It was this. It's called Symphony for Band.
Yeah.
I mean, I went all out for this one because it was for their 150th anniversary.
Oh wow.
Long and the short of it is, I think I told Larry this story in the first time he interviewed me. But here I am. I'm standing in front of 65 of the world's best players, right? United States Navy concert band, Naval Academy band, excuse me. And they know how to use firearms. So I'm standing in front of them going, okay, what am I bringing to the table?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, aside from my music, I was intimidated.
Yeah.
They didn't want me to be. They wanted me to be relaxed and everything. But after talking with the director, I said, would it be okay to play a practical joke? And he said, well, it depends on what it is. I said, okay. So at the first rehearsal, first rehearsal was in May, I think it was, and it was very warm in Annapolis, and they were rehearsing in a basement at the time. Short ceilings, you know what that does to a band. And everybody's hot and whatever, but they're in uniform, right? They're in their summer weight uniforms for that because they knew better. I walk in, I'm wearing a long sleeve shirt and, you know, a t-shirt underneath. I stopped at one point. I said, ladies and gentlemen, please excuse me. You have to wear your uniforms, but I don't have to. So I'm going to take off my shirt. And when I took off my shirt, the front of I had this made up. The t-shirt said on the front, blame the composer. And then when I turned around to put the shirt, my regular shirt down,
yeah,
they saw the back and it said, blame the conductor. And they laughed. Cool. And they laughed and we got along fine.
Yeah. Yeah, with a group like that, I mean, it's to be a conductor in front of a group like that, the question is, can you have some sort of more combined knowledge than all of them and bring like this huge presence? And for most conducting, people are not on that level. You know what I mean? So it's like, unless you've been a very purebred, super studied, and you're conducting all the time, that is just something, it would be like picking up a violin and trying to play it again for you. You know what I mean? Like, luckily you as a conductor, or as a composer, you know the music so intimately, so you can conduct like a composer. And that's really, people want that. I try
to bring that. I don't just conduct my own music.
Yeah.
So I try to bring that aesthetic though,
yeah,
to whatever it is I'm conducting. I try to get into what the composer is thinking about, you know, what he or she is trying to convey,
yeah,
and trying to bring that out.
So that brings up a question about your work with Broadway. You've done some writing for some things in New York, some theatrical things, and maybe some show running, some conducting and things like this?
Not conducting. I've written one off-Broadway show that actually had some legs. It was called Critic back in the 1980s. And it ran 41 performances, which for off-Broadway, for a musical, is pretty good.
Yeah.
I was interviewed on TV. It was nice. It had 5 of my 15 minutes of fame.
Right.
But I also wrote lyrics for other shows, all of which never really made it, but you know, I did it. Yeah. And music for still other shows, right. Including one that ran in Washington, D.C. for a while, called freethemusic.com. Okay. And that did okay too. Yeah. For that one, I just wrote the music. For Critic, I wrote both music and lyrics.
That's something I was going to mention, because I see you teach libretto. Do you teach like the study of
I teach
librettos?
I teach writing. Well, when I refer to librettos, I'm referring to them in musical theater, not opera. I'm much more knowledgeable about musical theater than I am.
Interesting, yeah.
Opera.
So what is the difference there?
Too long to get into.
Yeah. Okay. I'll Google it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you can Google it. I don't think you're going to find an answer.
Interesting. Okay.
Or at least not an easy one.
Yeah. Okay. Comes with the warning.
But
well,
so as a result of all of that experience, I started getting asked about, can you help me with this show? Can you help me with that show? And then I also started teaching writing for musical theater at NYU as one of the subjects that I teach in my composition lessons. And another colleague of mine, a friend of mine named Alan Cohen, he and I were commiserating one day. And we said, you know, there were only a couple of books out about this.
Right.
And they only talk about the script, the libretto, and the lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
They hardly mention the music, if at all.
Mm.
So I said, so what are we going to do about it? And he looked at me and said, yeah, we're going to have to write a book. So we wrote Writing Musical Theater. And as a result of that, I now get hired from time to time as a dramaturge, essentially, for musical theater.
Yeah. Wow. So you've really done it all. And then, okay, so here, let's get into the kind of actual composition stuff. What are you using these days? Are you more of like a pencil and paper sitting at the piano? You like to use the DAW, using mock-up software, Spitfire samples, the orchestra samples? Or do you mess with notation software, Dorico, Finale, whatever?
Okay, I'm kind of old school.
Yeah.
Uh,
Good.
So depending on what it is I'm writing, I'm sitting at the piano or the guitar or a pad, pad of paper, or the computer, and that's where I start. If I'm sitting at the piano, I have manuscript paper, pencils, and very large erasers.
So does it tend to be, you really like to work pencil and paper most of the time?
For rough drafts.
For drafting, yeah, for like a 5-line or, yeah. Mm-hmm, I agree. Because that's how I was brought up in college, and I can write with a pencil and paper 100 times faster than I can do anything else, honestly. And it's so much more accurate, like you can really get into these specific things you couldn't write out quickly on the computer.
What I tell my students are only used to using the computer at this point. And depending on who it is, maybe I'll give them an assignment and say, you must hand write this out.
Mm-hmm.
And the reasoning behind it for me is that no matter how sophisticated the software is, it's still software. It's still dumb. It's still going to do what it can do based on what you input.
Yeah.
If you have a pencil and paper, you're only limited by what you can physically draw.
Yeah.
Or write.
Which is anything. Yeah, you can get it like Messiaen type of
or
crazy notation. Yeah, where you're just drawing.
Or John Cage notation.
Yeah.
Any of that.
Wonderful. Okay, so that there's this little thing. Have you seen this thing called Staff Pad recently?
For iPad?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have seen it.
I'm very interested in incorporating it in the classroom. Because essentially you can do what you're saying in handwrite notation traditionally, and it'll turn it into XML right away. I'm
waiting for Finale to either buy that company or to come up with their own.
Yeah.
Because I do use Finale. I'm very good at it. I even do some engraving for other people using it.
You do? Okay. Yeah, because Finale's best for engraving, I've heard.
I learned the engraving process when I worked for music publishers.
I see. Very, very cool.
My first job out of college was working as an editor for Warner Brothers Music, which is now owned by Alfred.
So what's your day-to-day as an editor?
When I was doing that?
Yeah.
Everything and anything could come across my desk. I'll give you just one example. There was a song that was made popular by Barbra Streisand many, many, many years ago called Evergreen. Remember that? You know that song?
It's a little before my time, I think, possibly.
Yeah. All right.
Evergreen. I can imagine Barbara. Yeah, I know.
All right. It was about the same time as when the very first Superman film came out.
Okay, yeah.
All right. Let's talk about that then. The super... Right? That theme. Okay. Just that theme, just that opening theme.
Yeah.
When I was working at Warner's, we put out, it must have been 100 different arrangements of that theme in that one season.
Because you have to do the one for the kids, elementary school, middle school, high school. university?
Chorus, orchestra, band, piano,
Wow.
all the variations on that, string orchestra, full
Yeah.
orchestra,
Mm,
concert band, easy concert band, harder concert band,
mhm.
marching band, corps style marching band,
Yeah.
easy piano.
Kazoo
That's-
choir. That's amazing.
Maybe, I don't even remember, but
I've always kind of wondered, like, who does 100 different arrangements of these pop songs that are popular, you know? So that
well, most publishers have either people on staff
yeah.
or they hire people from outside. Warner Brothers did both. I got to do, when I was hired, I was their guitar guy at first. So if they needed some easy guitar books or something like that done, they would come to me.
Very cool. That's fantastic. So, okay. So let's get into the nitty gritty here.
Please.
All of us music teachers are not able to teach, you know, our instrumental music classes, essentially. Most of us. For at least my students, just on one day, they said, okay, we have coronavirus. We're quarantining the school. You just don't come back. They announced it the day after they left. So my
So they didn't even have their instruments.
Exactly. Nobody has their instruments pretty much, which is okay. But, you know, it got into this thing where it's like, what am I going to do? So I decided to use Noteflight. It's free. It's a decent notation software. It works great. Yeah. And I was like, I'm just going to teach them how to write and compose, which is, I've done a good bit of it lately and I love writing, but teaching it is it's something that I'm sure some schools have at a middle school level, but it's not that.
I missed that. I missed that.
Well, I was going to say, it's just not very common to teach to a 12-year-old. You know, as opposed to teaching guitar, violin, where there's like a method book. It's more, do these 3 things, put your fingers in the right place, good job. This is so much more wide open. I mean, it could not be more wide open. So essentially what I'd like to do is come up with as many ideas, and maybe Larry could help as well, just anything, teaching melody writing, counterpoint. How important is it that I really teach parallel fifths and octaves? Do we really have to get into that for like 4 months? You know what I mean? Because they're 12. I want them to just be very free and just using a C major scale. Let's write a million little melodies and some basic little harmonies, primary chords, triads.
It's interesting that you bring this up. A friend of mine is writing a book.
Yeah.
Based on her experience leading a workshop called Impact, which is mostly for high school students. And no, that's one of them. She has 2 different impact programs. One is for high school students, the other is for music teachers and non-professional, non-musicians who want to get into it.
Yeah.
But music teachers specifically so they can go back and teach their students about music. And she has these different exercises. If you want, I can put you in touch with her. Her name is Dr. Young-Mi Ha.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to write this down. Yeah, I would love to do that.
Yeah, I'm going to send it to you as a chat. So.
Well, while he's typing, I might say that what I always find is easier for people to start getting into it is just start with something simple like taking somebody else's music and even just having the students write out that one melody line.
Yes.
Yeah, I put that down on here. What do you consider to be the essential things to transcribe? Because I think there's a lot of value to saying, let's take a Bach chorale, a recording of it, and transcribe just the soprano line. That's your assignment. Like hardcore, simple, but very effective.
I would go back even further than that.
Yeah.
Not sorry, Larry, but.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree.
What I would do is start with rhythm.
Yes.
Get them into notating rhythm. Get them used to that. Rhythm is usually where people get hung up the most.
So true.
So let them get a feel for that. Let them learn how to subdivide. Let them learn how to figure out triplets.
Yeah.
You know, start with the basics. Start with whole note, half note, quarter note. Yeah. Move on to eighth notes. Add some rests in there. Then, once they're familiar with that, start introducing pitches. One or two, I would say start one or two pitches at a time.
Yeah.
If they're used to looking at music on the page, now they can see how it actually operates from the inside out. That's what you really want them to get.
Right.
So if you do it from rhythm first and then slowly add pitches, if you just go like mi do in C major, EC, and just have them create a melody just using that. Not even a melody, a motive, an idea.
A small motive, a two-note motive like Beethoven. Yeah, two-note motives is a great idea. And it really...
Well, two-pitch.
Two-pitch, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it'll get like... it sets the foundation for development. Exactly. Which is something I wanted to talk to you about. I think for harmony writing, there's a lot of resources. It's quite mathematical once you break it down. I mean, I feel like I know as a jazz musician and composer, I know harmony quite well. But teaching melody writing and teaching development, I'm looking for resources or concepts, because it almost seems like the kind of thing you've absorbed this, obviously through your education, but I dare to say probably most of it just through listening. Huh?
Not just education. Education, experimentation, and failure in those experimentations.
There you go. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Experiment, yeah.
Yeah, but allowing yourself to fail at something and figuring out why it failed. Mm-hmm. We learn more from that than when something works. Oh yeah, that works, we discount it. But if it fails, you go, why did that happen?
Well, so when you are experimenting, you're sitting at home and you've come up with a theme, simple, maybe motive, like dee-dee-dee-da, where do you usually look to say, okay, I want to start developing this idea?
It depends. I hate doing this, but I always wind up doing it. I have to say it depends.
Yeah.
It always depends on the kind of piece you want to write.
Yeah.
If you want to follow a more or less established form.
There you go.
Or
yeah,
if there's another factor involved.
What do you consider the standard forms that you like to write in? Like, do you write in sonata allegro form, or you consider that? Yeah,
it's still viable.
Yeah.
I mean, look at all the different ways so many composers have used it.
I've almost had a difficult time actually studying it because it's hard to find people who haven't deviated. Like Mozart has some good examples of it being quite square.
Oh no.
But then many that aren't. Yeah, of course.
No, Mozart's a slight. He really is, because you take a look at some of his sonatas that are supposedly in sonata allegro form, and you go, wait a minute, what did he just do there?
Right. Yeah.
Beethoven absolutely took the form and went, okay, let's destroy this now.
Yeah.
And, you look at his first sonata, it's very Haydn-esque. You look, the one in F minor. You look at the Waldstein, he's doing some really radical stuff in there, mostly about key relationships and things like that. Mm-hmm. The basic form is still there. And then you get further into the romantics and, everything's off the table. Mm-hmm. You have Schubert using 3 themes or, things like that going on.
Yeah, because I think with Haydn, it is kind of maybe the most textbook, crystal clear examples of things with form.
And even then, he was experimenting too.
He was still experimenting. There's people before him, I'm sure, that are a little more clear.
No. I mean, yes and no. The thing is, you're expecting, you can't expect good composers, just to follow a form exactly.
Yeah.
They're always going to try something new because they don't want to be cookie cutter.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and related to education, it's like, how do we I like our melodica development. Let's say I was tackling form. Okay, we've learned over the next few weeks how to write a simple 2-measure melody that has some sort of repetition on this. Something nice is happening, and then it's like, let's try to apply it to a classical form. Because sure, we'll do some
Well,
writing.
that's a huge jump, though.
Yeah, it's a huge jump.
Yeah. So why not break it down into other steps? You start with a 2-measure subphrase.
Yeah.
You make that into a 4-measure phrase.
Yeah.
And then you call that the antecedent or the question or whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
And then you create another phrase to match it, to go with it, that you call the antecedent, the consequent, or the answer.
Right.
And from there, now you have something that you can build in more of a piece on.
Yep.
You can create a folk song.
Yeah. A
lot of folk songs use antecedent consequent phrases, and they'll do one and they'll do something else and they'll come back to it. You know, something simple like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's great.
You can grow the music from there.
Yeah. Yeah, keep it coming. So, I mean, this is cool. So let's say we come up with, when you think of a sub phrase, what do you think of as a sub phrase?
Oh, like 2 bars or something, depending on the music.
Yeah.
Yeah, something more than just a motive.
Okay.
The Beethoven you used before, da 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 da, that's both a motive and a subphrase, just because of the way he uses it. Mm-hmm. But then again, when you first hear that, you think it's a subphrase, but then he goes on, da 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 da, bum 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 bum. There's your subphrase, really.
Yeah. And so the antecedent to that is dee 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 da dee 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 da da, because they're filling the space there. Yeah.
You're completing the thought.
I see. Because it's interesting. I come from a world of jazz, rock, hip hop, funk, soul, and classical for sure. I mean, I'm very thoroughly trained in that. But sort of like you on guitar, more writing Beatles-y kind of things, or for me, writing for film and TV and stuff.
Yep.
That stuff it's just a lot different than trying to teach them. I want to teach proper classical composition and keep it alive, because I know a lot of schools are going towards like, yeah, we're going to make beats in the DAW. And I love that stuff. And it's very valid, but I don't want everyone to totally lose a relationship with counterpoint and form.
Because then it all starts to sound like EDM.
There's only
and I'm sorry, that's, I have scoured the various, all the various EDM stars or whatever, and I have yet to find anything I really like in that genre.
I think it's going to happen, man, where somebody's going to start sampling Beethoven string quartets and putting them on top of EDM.
It's not about that. It's not about that. It's the structure of the typical EDM tune.
The form is so much different, because it took me a while to get this, but my old conducting teacher, Danielle Missick, kind of helped me understand. He was like, look, there's music for different purposes. And they're always
absolutely.
There's our concert music. I would love to go to a concert and listen to your music. It would be fantastic. Whereas if you played your music in a club at 1 o'clock in the morning,
people would leave.
They would leave, right?
They would finish their drink and go.
Yeah. And it's just, it took me a while to get that not all music is necessarily meant to be serious about life and death and God and all this, serious, it can just be about dancing and having fun and community.
Absolutely. But it doesn't have to be boring.
It doesn't have to be boring. I know what you mean.
And unfortunately, that's my problem. And it is my problem, not anybody else's, with what I've heard in EDM.
Yeah.
Because to me, what I hear, I don't hear music passively. I hear it actively, no matter what kind it is.
Right.
So I'll listen to a piece of, some EDM music, and I'll go, okay, there's 4 bars.
Yeah.
There it is again.
Yeah.
There it is again. And it's literally 4 bars repeated ad nauseum with changes in instrumental color.
Additive form. It's pretty much just additive form.
Yeah. And there are sections, there are noticeable sections, there's the, I forget the terms.
They have like a riser.
Yeah.
And a drop, the bass drop.
Yeah, the drop. But the 4-bar figure never actually changes.
Like a second ending would be nice.
Not even a second ending, just like change 1 chord.
I get what you're saying. Well, I put that on here as well. Like, we all grew up. I mean, I'm younger than you guys, but you grew up, the sampler was invented, the drum machine was invented, the synthesizer.
Back in the Stone Age, yeah.
And, 99% of the music I hear that's making money commercially is that music, isn't it? So how do we...
Well, it's certainly more formulaic nowadays.
Yeah.
But there have always been formulaic pieces of music throughout history. What we consider to be masterpieces or really great pop songs or rock songs, when you stop and look at them, they're following a formula too.
Oh yeah.
It's what I said before. It's not about it being a formula. It's about being interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because Sonata Allegro is a form too, a formula.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Hear the blues.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, you're a jazz musician. Thelonious Monk, Well, You Needn't.
Mm.
That's essentially a 12-bar blues with really screwed up changes, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just reharmonize all day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the world we live in. So, well, to come back to that question a little bit, like, how do you guys feel about incorporating 808 drum kit and synthesizer and drum set and contemporary instruments into classical writing, and how important is it? Because I'm looking at my students, I'm thinking, okay, in 40 years, you're going to be about 60. Let's see, or they'll be in their 50s. They're probably not going to even, I'm imagining, guitars won't even be on the radio. The piano, I mean, imagine, what's the last...
There'll be guitars, there just won't be radio.
Yeah, right, there won't be radio. It seems like a lot of instrumentation is changing at a rapid pace, and I think we really have to recognize it. So it's like, how do we address that as composers? Do we write for the synthesizer? Do we write for the drum machine? And
I don't know. I don't want to prognosticate, but I will observe one thing. At the same time, you have all of this digital world, music creation. You also have things like the ukulele being one of the most popular instruments ever right now.
Yeah, it did have a resurgence.
It started having a resurgence about 5-6 years ago, and it stuck.
Maybe it's because the contrast. People are so used to hearing doo doo, and then they hear light ukulele, and they're like, "Oh, it's great." Yeah.
So I think there's room for all of it.
Sure.
Whether I would incorporate electronics, I currently feel uncomfortable with it only because I don't know it.
I see. That's interesting for you to admit that.
I have no problem admitting that. If I were to learn more about how these things work, and if I had them available to work with and get used to, then I would probably incorporate it.
Well, I'm just on the cusp of myself. I mean, you can see here, like, I just bought a drum machine.
Oh, wow.
And I have a nice
Is that an 808? Or?
It's an MPC, a Kai MPC.
Ah, okay.
And I'm putting together a composition portfolio. And I was thinking about doing a similar thing for my kids. And it's like, I do want to touch on that stuff. And I've tried it in the classroom. We'll do some 4-part writing, strings kind of stuff. There's a certain level of interest because it is a low interest activity because of just the voice leading principles and the raw study. But if you do get them on an iPad and just go boom, boom, they're like, they love it. And then let's add strings on top of that. Let's add a English horn and a synthesizer sub-bass. I want to kind of touch on that and tie that classical education into something they're a little more familiar with and excited about doing. They love the computers, and who doesn't love the sound of a big synthesizer as well? I mean, it is really fun to just push one button and it's like huge sounding, as opposed to what you were saying. You go to play the violin, you try to play open E. Good luck, buddy. They get deterred so easily. So I don't know. I guess the question is here, like, let's say I'm incorporating some of these resources and using different genres, hip hop, rock and roll, and obviously classical. I still, no matter what, want to incorporate like good harmony principles, good melodic writing principles. So what do you consider like the definitive resources for the canon of composition?
Oh,
I know it's a hard question.
Uh, it's not a hard question, it's a hard answer
Yeah.
because it's so open-ended.
Yeah.
I mean, give me some parameters.
Okay. Well, so let's talk. So I have this resource from your colleague here. You're saying, but let's say specifically harmony writing. Specifically, like, do you think the world should start with this is a C major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are the chords built off. That's how I like to teach it. Whereas a lot of teachers, maybe they go, this is a C major scale. The first chord is Roman numeral 1. And they get very into this is going to be a 1, 6, 4 chord. The nomenclature, it starts to like take a 12-year-old and they go,
You can't do that to a 12-year-old. When I was teaching
30-year-olds and they have trouble with it.
There is that. I've taught theory at when I was first starting to teach at NYU. I taught theory classes, and had maybe half of my first class were resistant to the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, one kid came up to me afterward. He said, I'm a drummer. I don't need to take this theory.
Yeah.
And I said, well, okay. You're a drummer. What do you want to do with it when you get out? When you graduate? He said, oh, I want to do studio work.
Mm-hmm.
I said, great. Let me paint a picture for you. Let me give you a scenario.
Yeah.
So I said, you're in the studio. You're doing a recording date, and you played a set on this recording, and you're packing up to leave, and the producer comes over to you and says, hey, listen, we need to add a vibraphone to this.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the chart, play it down.
Yeah.
You've never seen it before. What do you do? He said, okay, I'll be in your class tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Man, you got to know how to read. Although these days, I work with so many musicians playing gospel music.
Mm-hmm.
So many of the contemporary guys, they don't read. They just play by ear, and
that's fine. Come on, the Beatles really didn't read music. I think George read a little bit, and McCartney learned to read a bit later.
Yeah.
But starting out now. No, but you're talking about teaching music theory to 12-year-olds. I think you have, I don't know. I would personally approach it a little differently. I would maybe not start with this is C major. I would say, here's C, sing C.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to sing the same note as you, but you keep that note and I'm going to change mine.
Yeah.
And then you sing an E, right? Or I sing an E.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden you have a third. You go, you hear that? Okay, let's write that down. I'm singing this note.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can see on the page that C is down here and E's up here. There's a space in between them. Let's put a note in between them and call that D. We're going to go in alphabetical order, starting on C. And you get them to, the trick, I think the trick is to get them to hear it, to hear the relationships.
Right. It was making me think of what you were saying. When you started on guitar. You played by ear. When
absolutely.
I was same way, playing rock and all this stuff and just learning how to play the bass guitar at home by ear. That's really where it's at. And when I think of a Beethoven, we don't know, and I'm sure some scholar out there knows, maybe you do. The way in which he was taught composition, I don't think is the way we're taught composition. No. That's my guess. I don't.
A lot of it was emulation. Here's a sonata by Haydn. Write your own, and you have to figure out what it is that Haydn was doing, and you try to write along the same lines.
Because this is a language. You're so right, and it's. You say something to me as a baby, and I eventually learn that word. This is how it has to be taught.
Why can't we teach music more like that?
Well, it'll be an interesting challenge here because, like you said, first of all, my kids can read and play their butts off, man. They're amazing. I run a very serious program, so they're ready. Good. But the one of the challenges is ear training. Like you're saying, I love to do singing with them, lots of singing, and it helps so much. Anytime we can't play something, we sing it a bunch, and it just pops it right out of the instrument. But ear training is very much like you were saying, sort of interactive in some ways. The notes here, da 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 da, no no da da da, you know, and you do this kind of stuff. Now I got to do it online. I got to do it on the computer. So I think what you were just saying, I have to do creative examples where I have to almost pretend to be a student and kind of say, here's a C, you know, here's an A, here's a, you know, whatever, and singing intervals to them and trying to get them to do it at home maybe.
Yeah.
Singing is really what's up, man. Just a ton of ear training exercises.
Or if they have their instruments, you know, let them play it on their instruments too.
Yeah, because we can do stuff like you're saying, singing intervals, and then it's like, let's take 3 of those intervals, you sing them and record them in any order, like da 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 da, and then that becomes a melody. Because naturally you're using your voice, which you said is your root. That's the best way to write, I think. Because to sit down and say, well, it should be the third of this diminished chord, and then I need to doing like all this straight up theory. I think sometimes you stop hearing it.
Yeah, you know what I used to tell my theory classes at NYU. Usually the first day, I would tell them, look, half of the stuff we're going to be covering in this semester, the very first semester, is stuff you already know.
Yeah.
You just don't know the names for it.
Don't know the names. There you go.
You can hear it. You know it when you hear it.
Sure.
You just don't know what to call it. And the reason you're here in this theory class is because you want to be able to converse with more experienced musicians using the same language. So you can say, this is a perfect fifth, this is a minor third, etc., and go from there. So it's more about learning the jargon.
The jargon. That's so true. Yeah, because people are naturally musicians.
Yeah.
They?
I also don't think composers sit down and think of that like, ooh, I'm doing a 1/6/4 5/7/1.
No.
As a matter of fact, I didn't really start writing music until somebody explained to me like what a C7, what were those notes? They didn't call it a 5/7. They said, well, C7, C, E, G, and B flat, you know, that sort of thing. So because you write what you want to hear, you write what sounds good to you.
Yeah. And
sometimes it doesn't even make it's even hard to give it a name for, well, what chord is this? I mean, you come up with
why did I pick that chord? It doesn't even belong in the key.
Well, right. And also you don't, I mean, of course we're thinking about function, but theory is more about function, but we don't think of it like that. If that makes sense. As a composer.
Well, it's interesting because
you just write what you want to, you know, what you want to hear.
We don't, when we're creating, any one of the three of us, when we're creating music, you know, we're not thinking in terms of, you know, oh, I think it would be really neat if I go to the Neapolitan.
Right.
You know, I don't think in those terms at all. If I'm sitting at the piano or the guitar or even just working something out in my head, it's like, what sounds right at this moment and what fits in with what I'm doing.
Or the
more about that than
emotion you're trying to get out of the, you know, the piece, you know, what's the arch of the phrase, you know, whatever. It's
yeah. Now there are tricks of the trade.
Yeah.
Sure.
That we learn in our theory classes and with our composition teachers. But that's really it. You know, like I had a composition teacher tell me, and I've wound up telling it to my students, that I can't teach you how to compose. I can't.
Yeah.
I can teach you certain things. I can teach you structure, how to use forms that have been around for a while, how to adapt them, how to, you know, explode them. You know, if you're in a dark room and don't know where the walls are, you can't break them down. So learning whether it's music theory or something about musical structure, anything like that, that puts that little bit of light in the room and allows you to find the walls, and you can knock it down and get the hell out of it.
Well, it's yeah, you can't. It's hard. I think on top of what Stephen just said, it's hard to teach inspiration. You know, it's hard. It's hard to. You can teach people the craft of writing music, but you can't give them good ideas.
Right.
Yeah, because to me that comes from just this lifetime of knowing the language and listening and just the only way I would know, or whenever I'm writing or soloing or whatever, it's like the reason I have a vocabulary is because I've transcribed a huge amount of music throughout my entire life.
Yep.
You know, and not just on the instrument, but like in my mind. Like I have a pretty thorough vocabulary library of melodic concepts just from millions of hours of listening to music, you know?
Sure.
So it really, what do you guys think is some of the things that students need to be hearing at a young age that they're not hearing right now? Because they're not hearing Bach, they're not hearing Brahms. They don't hear any of this music pretty much at all, in my opinion. Very few of the students, their thought of classical music is that one radio station that they pop on and it plays, so maybe just like a 1 hour of Baroque music, and they get bored, and then they think classical music is lame. And it's like, no, guys, like, have you heard Mahler? Like, have you heard it? It's like amazing. They're like, I have no idea who that is, you know?
Mahler can be hard to take for a 12-year-old.
Yeah, right.
But did I say that understatedly enough?
If you got 2 hours to blow, right?
Yeah, straight to Mahler.
But what you could do is go to the fringes of classical music, of concert music, and put on something that you wouldn't expect to call classical music, and let them hear that.
Yeah.
And find out where that came from and work backwards to the more basic stuff. You could start with a piece by Steve Reich or Philip Glass.
Yeah.
Or start with Terry. Oh, here's one. Terry Riley's in C.
Mm-hmm.
You could even have the class create their own piece in that way, made up of melodic fragments that go together, and they can move through the score like a swarm of bees.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, sort of a pan-diatonic sort of thing.
Yeah, pan-diatonic and minimalism. It's
pan-diatonic meaning like Charles Ives, like two keys at once.
No. That's go ahead.
That's just all the notes in the key. So if it's in C, it's just all the notes in the key of C. So yeah. In essence, nothing is really that dissonant because it fits in the key. I mean, Copland, like Appalachian Spring, there's a lot of pan-diatonic stuff in Appalachian Spring.
Sort of just thinking, whatever the mode is for the chord at this moment, it's all available. Just use whatever you want.
Yeah. In Terry Riley's in C, it's essentially a C major scale, except he has a B flat in there.
Oh. At like a B flat and then a B.
Mixolydian. Yeah, basically a Mixolydian.
Okay.
Scale. But
it's funny how many different things we can come up with a Mixolydian scale. You were talking about Thelonious Monk, and it's like that's quite a bit different than Terry Riley.
Yeah. Well,
only 12 notes.
The tune "Well You Needn't" is actually Phrygian, isn't it? Not Phrygian, Lydian.
Lydian dominant. Yeah, that's a nice.
Yeah.
The sharp 4 and the dominant is spicy. Well, wonderful. So I have a 2:00 meeting in about 4 minutes, so I guess we'll have to start wrapping up.
Great.
Well, okay, so maybe to sort of finalize here, for the both of you, just any sort of like last minute thoughts on, I've got, you've got a young teacher here. I'm going no instruments. I'm going all composition. I think it's going to be wonderful because they don't get to do creative stuff. Everyone gets into music and thinks, I'm going to be so creative. No, you're not. You need to learn exactly what's on the page perfectly. That's really what instrumental studies are. So much of it, people get turned off, and now it's like, ooh, let's do some creating. It's such an open thing. I've got
make it creative. Make it creative from the get-go. Yeah. If you're teaching a new concept, let them be creative with it.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever that kind.
And I think what Stephen said earlier, start simple. Start with rhythm. Add a note. Add 2 notes. Go from there.
Yeah.
Simple question answer.
Mm-hmm.
Right. 4 bars. Write 8 bars. Go to maybe a 2-part form. A little by little.
Yeah. From there, you can create binary, rounded binary, ternary. What's the word?
Tertiary.
Thank you. I'll go with that. Tertiary form.
Well, and like you said, if you go with if they use like any kind of software, whether it's like GarageBand, if they're on an iPad or a Mac, or I'm sure there's something comparable on PC. But as you can see, I'm pretty Mac'd out. But it's so easy for them to do that, but then teaching them, well, you got this one section, now you can make a second section. So that's your A, that's your B.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, it'll be interesting because we're not using, they don't have GarageBand on their Chromebooks. You know, it's like a basic kind of, yeah. And so we're able to use NoteFlight. So we're going to go all notation. That's like all we've got.
Okay.
And I think it's good. I think because it does kind of force an academic element into things, which is being lost on the young generation.
Let me ask a question.
Yes, sir.
In NoteFlight, can you do like I mean, is there a drum line that you can add in?
Good question. I think it has everything. I think it's basically just
okay. Because then you could actually do something with just rhythm.
Yes, very good idea. Mm-hmm.
And remember, more cowbell.
More cowbell. Yeah. I'll put in more cowbell. Very cool. And then, did you guys have any books that were important to you? Things that you still look to, maybe about counterpoint rules, melody writing, composition?
Oh boy,
there's a lot.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Everything from Hindemith to Piston to.
A simple one, it's too advanced for a 12-year-old, but a simple one is just called musical composition. I can't remember the first name, but it's Brindle Smith.
Yes.
A small.
Hold on. Yeah.
Probably have it on
Reginald
Brindle Smith.
That's right.
It's a really small little thing, but he talks about melody, and then it talks about organizing the melody and like duet, whatever. Talks about the form. It's very basic, but it's a really
hold on a minute. I'm going to get something.
Yeah, okay. It's a really good introduction, to composition for somebody who's starting to get serious into that.
Yeah.
Of course, then you go on to there. Then if you get in harmony, like the Vincent Persichetti harmony book is like, every permutation of what you would call a chord possible.
What's the last name you said? Persichetti?
Persichetti. Yeah.
I haven't heard of this book.
Yeah, he was he was very popular as a band composer, but I think he was at Curtis Institute.
Oh my God, yeah.
Who's that?
He must know his way around.
Vincent Persichetti, wasn't he? I was telling about the Vincent Persichetti harmony book.
I don't know where I found this book, but I don't know if you can see it.
Oh,
no.
Pocket.
Chambers Pocket Guide to Music Forms and Styles.
Okay.
It's a little dictionary kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And that's one. And another one, I go to real bookstores and find these things, usually in the cutout bin, but they're useful. This is an old book called Musical Structure and Design.
Yeah.
Musical Structure and Design, and it's by Cedric Thorpe Davey.
Okay. Great.
CEDRICTHORPE. Thorpe Davey. DAVIE.
Fantastic. Wow, man! So I have to read for it
now. Yeah. Now, these books are not really for the kids. They're for you to interpret and use with the kids.
Right. That's essentially what I've realized is I'm going to have to take, because I've been taking lessons composing for film and stuff and video games, and I'm at the point where I'm feeling like I have a huge amount to offer and so much to learn from guys like you. But it's like, it's an interesting challenge to say, let's condense that down to a child. It's kind of a beautiful thing almost. Like, I love the idea where it's, when you're young, that's what you want to do. You want to be creating. They learn best that way. So it's like, let's embrace it. I think it's going to be very, very cool. So I'll do a lot of reading, your recommended reading, and I will condense it down for them.
Awesome.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it's time for us to go. And
Yep.
I appreciate it, Chris. And thank you, Stephen, for being a part of this.
Yeah,
Thank
gentlemen,
you.
thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And I know my students do as well, of course.
You're welcome.
Chris, please stay in touch with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Same. I'll reach out to you guys soon.
Great.
Okay.
Okay.
And thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
All right.